back and forth between my Word document and this little page where I digitized this butterfly. Just so you know, the green satin was digitized in Embird Editor, which is kind of unheard of to be able to digitize a satin in an editor type program. And you can see it has its issues, but then I took this satin into Embird Studio, the vector program, and I was able to manipulate it in the Embird Studio vector program. And that also is just kind of unheard of, that you could take a stitch file, because this is a stitch file in Embird Editor, and then take it into Studio and make it more beautiful. And then this one was actually digitized in Studio from the get-go, from the start, and it was just expanded off of this butterfly. So you could see it's got sharper points, it follows it more exact. So, but at any rate, when I do flip back and forth between this, you'll know why I have 3 butterflies. But let me just start with some of the benefits of Embird, and I'm going to try to make this a short video because my videos do tend to get long, just because it's such a powerful program and there's so much to talk about. So in this Word doc, I just want to start out with, in general, the advantages of Embird. The biggest thing is that Embird does not forget about people who bought their software 20 years ago. They still let those people upgrade to a newer version. Hatch software does not do this. I have Hatch Customizer, which is just a font program, because I thought I would try it. I only bought it a year ago, and now they won't let me upgrade it. They came out with an upgrade for other versions of Hatch, but they won't upgrade Customizer. So I was very upset about that, and it just made me realize how fortunate we are to have Embird, because the people at Embird are really good people, and they will let you upgrade from like even before 2004. So at any rate, that's one benefit. And this is a big pet peeve of mine, the terminology in embroidery software. The word connection in Embird is just that. It's a line of stitching that connects two objects. A connection is not a jump. A jump is meant to be cut off or trimmed so it has a tie off and a tie on. This makes discussing digitizing very easy. So let's just flip to this design in Embird Studio, and by connection and jumps, you'll see what I mean. This sentence that I stitched out or digitized, it has connections in it. And most professional digitizers, let me zoom in, use the zoom button. Most professional digitizers will use connections between letters. Yes, you have a tie off at the end of a word, but between your letters, you have connections. There's no tie off at the end of this E. There's no tie on at the beginning of this W. This is just a stitch. And so that's how the pros digitize. And generally, this word, these letters in this word would probably be even closer together, and so on. But Let me zoom in a little more. You can see, and this is what digitizers do, they land a stitch point right between the two letters. And when you do that, it makes this whole connection invisible. And if I go into Stitches View and click on Points Editing Mode, tap once, and then draw a box, there's your stitch point. So there's a stitch point here, here, and there. There's no tie-offs or any tie-ons or tie-offs or anything. And you can see, if I move this, that's just a stitch. There's no tie-off there. And the beauty of this, Control Z, is that when you land a stitch point like this in between your letters, no embroiderer is going to be confused as to whether or not they're supposed to be cutting this. They'll know they're not supposed to because there's a stitch point there. So, at any rate, so that's a connection. And so a connection is not a jump. A jump is meant to be cut off or trimmed. So go back into regular view, 3D view. You don't see the jumps. Like you don't see the jump from the D to the V. You don't see it. And that's because I'm in 3D view. 3D view is a true view of what will sew out. So this is how your design will sew out, because the jump that is between the D and the V is meant to be cut. You cut it there, you cut it here, or you have your machine do so. Because you could set your machine, most of them, to trim jumps. If it's a tubular machine. A lot of your single needle machines won't. They'll only trim on a color change. But a lot of times I don't let my machine even trim the jumps. I want to trim them because it slows down your stitching. It's harder on your machine. It's harder on your cutter, and so on. Sometimes it doesn't start it good when it starts the next letter. So, but at any rate, this is the 3D view, and this is what you want to see when you're looking at your finished digitizing project. You want to see this on screen. You want to see the connections because those are going to stitch, but you don't want to see the jumps because those are going to be cut off. Now, you can see the jumps if you go into Stitches View. They'll show up as dotted lines, and that's very, very easy to understand, to see the difference between this dotted line, which is a jump that's going to be cut, and this connection, which is solid, and that's going to stitch. Now, the other thing you can do in Embird, if you did want to see your jumps, even when you're in 3D view, you can go into Manager, and you can go to Options, Show floating stitches or jumps. They mean the same thing. You can check that. So now you'll see them here, and you can see if I go into Show again, you'll see that it's checked. So then if I go back into Editor, into 3D View, now you'll see my jumps. And sometimes you do want to see them. You want to see them in 3D because you want to maybe plan out your digitizing, and you want to make sure they're not in the way when your design is going around, and and so on. So, but the choice is there, and that's the beauty of it. So I'm going to go back into Manager because normally I don't show my jumps because I know where they are when I've made the design, when I made it in Studio, which is the show. Uncheck that. Studio is the digitizing module of Embird. Let me go back into Editor. So for me, oh, and let me flip this back into 3D. Zoom in. So the fact that they call a connection and they call a jump is big for me. And the fact that you can actually see a true view of your design when you're in 3D view, that's big. So going back to the Word doc, this one we already talked about. 3D view is actually a true view. So you will see the connections between the letters, but won't see the jumps between the words. And I just touched on that. So I guess I covered both of these at the same time. You're seeing an exact image of how your design will look when it is done stitching. This is how it's going to look when it's done stitching, with the connections and with the jumps trimmed. And then moving down, Embird is the lowest price software available that offers features only available in $7,000 to $10,000 software. And you'll see that once we get through all of these items. This is a big thing for me. Embird does not bog down your system. So when you are trying to edit stitch points or edit vector nodes, and you're trying to zoom in on you're zooming in on your object or your design or what have you, you don't have to wait for the software to regenerate the stitch points every time you zoom in. This saves so much time and frustration. So for example, if I did go into, say, Stitches view and I clicked on points editing mode, this is where you can move your stitch points around. Now remember, I'm in editor, so these are stitch files. These are not vector objects, these are stitch files. So when I zoom in, you're going to see stitch points. But as I zoom in, you don't see the system bogging down. Even if I went and clicked on points editing mode and drew a box around it to see the stitch points, as I zoom in once, twice, it just zooms in. You don't have to wait for all of these squares, these little nodes to regenerate. They just stay put. Other softwares aren't like that. And I don't really want to get into like names of other softwares, but trust me, Embird does not bog down your system like a lot of the popular softwares do. So, so that's big. So now we'll go into specifically advantages of Embird Editor. I know those were kind of overlapped, but so in Embird Editor, that's the one I was just in, you can export cut files in either SVG or FCM format. That's for your brother machine. And it asks you how much you want to inflate it, because you know whenever you save or export a cut file, you want it to be slightly bigger than your outline or your die line, they call it, your placement stitch, your placement outline, because you have to take into consideration the width of your cutting blade and also your margin of error. This is big. When you group objects in the objects window, you get one object. You don't just get a whole long vertical slew of objects that are just grouped together, but they're still in a long vertical line. You actually get one horizontal line of the colors, and everything is very compact, and this saves space and confusion. And let me show you what I mean. So I separated all my colors, and everything's nice and small, but I want everything grouped for just this butterfly. Well, this butterfly, if I click here, I'm still on that butterfly. Click here. Now I'm on the inside. Click there. There's another outline I made. That's the blue final. And now this one is the satin. And then this one drops down. So from here up, I want to group this. All I do is I click on this bottom one, I hold my shift button, click here, come up here, join, and now they're one object. And the colors are still all right there in a horizontal line. And that is so nice. So you can work with a complicated design and not have to chase around all your grouped objects. You'll know they're grouped because you can see they're grouped horizontally. And so here, this one and this one go together. So I can just hold my control button this time and join. And then this one and this one, join. And then this one. This one is grouped as one object, but you could see there's several items, and the reason why is because there's jumps after every word. That's your jump, your tie off, your jump, and you could locate that stitch if you want with the stitch locator. So then going back to the Word doc, so you get one object. And that leads me into what I just mentioned. When you are in Editor, you know you're working with a stitch file and not a vector file. And when you're in Studio, you know you're working with a vector file. So there's never any confusion what you're working with. And I love that. A lot of people write in Facebook and they're very confused with other programs because they think they saved it as a vector file, but really they brought it in as a stitch file and they had their program converted to a vector file, but of course it never converts beautifully when you do that, and they're just not even sure what they're working with anymore. That's a problem. But with Editor, you never have to wonder. So all of your files are pure. They're either pure vector files that you made in Studio, or they're pure stitch files that you either opened in Editor or brought into Editor from Studio. What you're buying on the internet are all stitch files, PES, JEF files, DSTs, those are stitch files. The other great thing in Editor is Embird's new features, the effect feature. It's amazing. I mean, I can't even tell you how much you can do with that feature. Um, it the one thing you can do is you can flatten fabric nap like fur or terry. People will call it a knockdown stitch, but there's a copyright on that. So Embird just calls it other things like plate or cavity. But anyways, this is where it is. Insert, effect, and then you choose. There's many choices now. They have like 5 choices, and I'll show you that in a minute. But so basically, the difference between plate and cavity is you can fine-tune how you want to flatten something, your fabric, by choosing either plate or cavity. Cavity kind of like is more, it goes, I'll have to show you, but it goes in more, and plate kind of starts from the outer edges more. But I mean, they make it so nice that you have such control. And you can also create offset outlines off of your design to make a unique patch shape that follows your design. So you don't have to just make a square patch or an oval patch, or a, you can actually have your patch follow your design. And that is under Insert Effect Contour. And that's what we did here. That's what these are. These are like patches that are actually following the shape of the butterfly. And this one, that's why it has so many outlines in it, is because I made it into a patch. And I have a 4-hour long video on how I worked with all of these files. It's very, very in-depth. And if you buy Embird from me, you'll get that 4-hour video. I also have a 2-hour video that kind of just highlights here and there. So my videos tend to get long. So, and I apologize, but there's so much to tell you. You can also fill an entire hoop or work area or exterior of a design with motif or fill stitches. So in Editor, it would be as if, let's just say we only had one butterfly. So we'll just choose this one, but I'll hold my control button and delete the others. Click on the butterfly. I'll show you my hoop. If I click stitches, I can see the hoop. And so while I have it selected, I'll click the center button here. And I'll go to Insert, Effect, Exterior, and this time I don't want to give it a positive inflate, I want to give it a negative inflate. And since my satin is 4 mils, if I had it at 0 inflate, it would just come along the outside edge. But if I give it a -2 mil inflate, it'll come right in the center. And then it'll fill all this exterior. So it'll be beautiful. And I'll just click Ignore Cavity. I'll just go with the motif fill again with the same settings. Hit 3D. There it is. And as a quilter, I know that, say if you did want to use this as quilting stitches behind your design on a block, you'd probably want to make these the density looser, but just know that quilters don't want to have a gap between the stipple, any kind of stipple, and their design. That's a no-no to have gaps. So, and the reason being is because you want your design to pop and you don't want to have a gap going around it. It's just not traditional. So this is what you want to do. You want to make sure, and you can see if I zoom in and click on stitches, you can see how this fill, this motif fill, comes right in the center of the satin, and that's what you want. And here's your density map, and you don't see any dark orange in here or anything. It's perfect. So like I said, if you were going to put this on a quilt block, and I know the design is kind of small for this block, but if you were, you'd probably use a looser fill. So let's go back. It seems like in any digitizing program, 12 to 13 is like the magic number, but I'm not sure. Let's try 13.5 on the width. It's not as consistent though. And that looks nice. That looks really nice. So the next advantage is that you can bring outlines, including your contours that you made in Editor. You can bring any of those outlines into Studio and turn them into vector files. This is big. If you have Studio, you can take this outline into Studio, and sometimes it's easier to make your outline here in Editor and bring it into Studio and just fix it a little bit. Sometimes not. And on my 4-hour video, you'll see the difference in these down here at the bottom and why that is so. So moving on to the next features, you can add stitch points quickly and easily. To sink a stitch point there, you can click on points editing mode, or like before, you can have the item selected and go into this parts window and highlight whichever one where you want to sync it, and then just hit points editing mode. And then if this is where you want to sync it and the arrow's going to the right, you click, first you want to click outside and then click on the node that's, before the arrow, and then insert, and then that's it. And then you can move it up right between here and the beginning of this satin. And so then in 3D, there it's sunk. And when you see that, you'll know you're not supposed to cut it. And then you could keep doing that, with all of your letters. So now we'll talk about the advantages in Embird Studio. And I did touch on it a little bit when I brought the stitch file into Studio, but I wanted to talk about the the types of vector files that you can import. And this is big. When you import them, they will be digitized automatically. And a lot of people will tell you, oh, you don't want to auto-digitize and you want to manually digitize, and auto-digitizing is more hassle, and it never comes out good. It's always complicated. Well, that's not always true. In fact, if you bring in a vector object that's halfway decent, a lot of your work is done. And then you can snap to the nodes of that vector object and improve on it and still maintain the integrity of that image. So you can fix a lot of images and vector files in Inkscape, which is a free vector program. You can do all that and make it simple and beautiful in Inkscape before you even import it into Studio. So this is really a big advantage of Embird over the other softwares. Other softwares will say, oh, well, you know, we can bring in an SVG as an image file. You just do, import image or whatever, something like that. But then you're relying on that software's substandard vector program where it will convert something into their own proprietary vector format. Those are never as good as a real vector program like Inkscape. So in Inkscape, you turn it into a vector program, or Adobe Illustrator, or Corel, or what have you. And then, as long as you're able to import it in as that vector file, then you know it will come in the same way that you saved it in, say, Inkscape or Adobe Illustrator or Corel Draw or what have you. So you can be assured that it's coming in pure as a pure vector file. And that's very important. So, so this is big because you now have a vector file that you can change just as if you digitized it yourself, because it comes in already digitized. But it's digitized around the exact outlines and parameters that, I shouldn't say parameters, it's digitized along the exact same outlines of the vector file. So let me just show you what I mean. If I were to go to butterfly. Here's the butterfly that I believe I brought in, and I can download this as a vector file. In fact, I think I already did. So you would just click here, because this is a vector file that Embird will accept. So you don't even need to rely on Inkscape. You could just download it from this free openclipart.org. These are license free. So you can just download the vector file and you're done. Import it into into Studio. But um, if you if there were no option to import it as a vector file, you can import it as one of these raster type files. PNGs are rasters, they're pixelated, and you can turn it into a vector file in Inkscape. So I already downloaded this, so I'm just going to go into Studio and I'm going to show you how I would import it. Import vector file. So design, import vector file. Here it is here. And as you can see, it's already digitized. And this mistake here was like that from the artist, which is probably why it's free, you know, and it's license free. As you can see, you know, it was like that. You know, it's not perfect, but you can fix it. You can fix it in Inkscape. You can fix it in Studio here, and I fixed it in Studio. And I used all the tools in Studio to fix this. I used a lot of the Snap to nodes, and just a lot of tools that Studio allows you to do to easily fix this. Now I could just leave it like it is and go ahead and generate the stitches because it's already digitized, and I could go into parameters. I can give it an angle, probably go with 90, and I can give it a fill. I'll probably go with, I like fill number 5, so I probably would go with that, and I'll just hit apply. And this is a complicated design, so sometimes it looks like your parameters window didn't go away, but all you do is you right click then on the object window, go to parameters, and then just click OK, and it's fine. And I'll go into 3D, and so there it is, it's digitized. And you know, you could leave it like that, or you could fix that in through there. And you probably would want to make the tentacles a little wider and turn them into a satin. And so I'll show you quickly one method that I like to use a lot. And this involves the Snap to tools of Embird and the Transform tool up here. And so there you have it. It's just beautiful. So then moving on, the snapping to nodes, we already discussed that. The next and biggest benefit of choosing Embird, you can snap to the nodes or object edges, so either or, of any previously laid down vector object. This includes the SVGs, etc. that you imported, or the vector objects that you manually created in Studio. And we did that when we snapped to that outline of, we created that outline to mimic this, then brought it over, and then snapped the pink of the fill to that outline edge to create that so perfectly. And, you know, I could have just as easily snapped to, you know, this vector object that I brought in if I needed to. There's just many benefits of the snapping. especially when you're recreating font or editing your font, when you're using TrueType font, you really need to be able to snap to object edges. Some of the lesser expensive software, and by lesser expensive I mean the $1,000 softwares, they don't even let you bold your fonts. So, and that's not good. You need to be able to bold your fonts. So not only does Embird allow you to bold your fonts, either TrueType or an Embird font, they also allow you to expand those fonts to make them even thicker. And so moving on, you can also expand any fill or column object. And remember, expand is not the same as a length by width increase. Expand is a 360-degree ballooning. So just, think like what a balloon does. It expands in all directions. So you can do that for any fill or column object. And you can do this to get a cut file. Because when you want a cut file, you want to expand it in this manner, 360 degrees. So then moving on, the software doesn't decide if you have connections. Just because your letters or objects are farther apart, you can tell it that you want connections or jumps with tie-offs, either or. You can tell it that. Software doesn't decide just because of the spacing of your objects. And that's good because if you want connections between letters, you want them no matter how far the letters are apart. If you generate your stitches and you see that, oh, that connection has too many stitches in it, you could then just go ahead and move the letters closer together. But you want to be able to see that you have connections. You don't want to have to go into Stitches View just to see if you have connections or not. And there are softwares that make you do that, where you have to hunt and see if you have connections or if you have trims or what have you. Whereas, Embird, when I go and make this font up here, whether I'm editing it, edit text, whether I'm editing it or whether I'm making it from scratch, I'm telling it right here, do I want connections between letters or do I want jumps between letters? I tell it right away. And when I told it that I want connections between letters, and the first time I generated this, oops, messed it up. The first time I generated this, I saw that some of my letters were farther apart, and so I just I moved them closer together and whatnot. But at least I knew that there's connections here. I don't have to go into Stitches View and look for whether or not there's a scissor here or something or anything. So, and I can always see it too in my window here, my objects window. I can see that I have a connection between each letter. I always see my connections. That is so important, and I should probably add that you can always see them. So that's big. And the other thing, and I think I went over this, you have total control over the stitch length of your connections. You can assign a total stitch length to all your connections, or you can just choose one connection and change its stitch length. And we did that also. And this is very important when you want to sync a stitch point between two letters so that the connection won't show. And you can turn your connections into outlines or manual stitches if you want. And that's a good handy tool to have. For instance, if say, I know this wouldn't happen on this letter, but let's just say if I took this H and I started it up here, this is a fill object. I can start it wherever I want, place fill start point there, but yet the C is still down, ending down there, down at the bottom. Now you notice my connection went all the way up to the where the H is starting. And so sometimes you have no other choice but to turn that connection into an outline and then split it. So I'll edit this connection, but here's the thing. I can edit it, and I'll just do insert, and I can have it go like that. Let me just insert another one so it's not on a slant there. So it's really far away from the edge. So, and then you can say, okay, I want to generate that. And generate all of this, go into 3D. And there is a stitch point there, but what is my stitch length on this outline? Okay, it's a max of 1.7, but do I really want to have a 1.7 connection going all the way up? Maybe not. Sometimes a situation exists where you need for that connection to be longer up in through here because you don't want bunching of your fabric and so on, or you know, too much density in there. So you would turn this whole connection into an outline, convert connection to outline, and then you would go back into vector view and you would hit edit. You'd split the outline here, and then this one you would turn back into a connection. So you have it selected, you go convert outline to connection. So now that one's back to a connection, and this one now is just an outline, and you can set it for, you know, a longer stitch length if you want, even, so that it's not, you know, so tight. And the other reason why this would come into play is if I go into 3D, let's just say Let me generate this. Okay, there's a stitch point, but what if it was a lot closer? Say if the C was a lot closer, and then I generated that, and it didn't get a stitch point, and so I had to go and make the connection even smaller. Hit edit. I had to make it like really small. Generate, and now I got another stitch point in there. But would I have really wanted, going to parameters on this connection, would I have really wanted my outline going up to be this short? No. So that's the beauty of being able to switch back and forth between outlines and connections. So that's really nice.